Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of APSATS, the Association of Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists, hosted by Dr. Jake Porter. APSATS is a nonprofit organization providing professional training and compassionate support to partners affected by problematic sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. In each episode, Dr. Jake guides a conversation of enlightening insights and practical tools to empower those affected by sex addiction and betrayal trauma to use their voices and live their values. The mission of Betrayal Recovery Radio is to offer hope to those in need of healing and growth to those moving through grief. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jake Porter.
Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio. I am your host, Dr. Jake Porter, and I am so grateful to be here with you today as we talk about something that is kind of new in the big picture of the recovery and therapy scene, and that is intensives. Really, when you look at the field of psychotherapy and you look at the typical methods and routes and models for walking through a process of psychotherapy, this idea of doing an intensive is pretty new on the scene. An intensive is any time that rather than breaking out of that week upon week or every other week situation of an hour or maybe even an hour and a half session, you instead come for several hours at a time, usually several days in a row, and really focus on one particular issue to go deep. My guest today is Aarti Chidambaram, and she is a senior clinical psychologist and the secretary of APSATS with nearly 19 years of experience specializing in partner betrayal trauma, complex trauma, and relational issues. She is the only APSATS trained partner specialist in Asia, and her unique approach helps partners of sex addicts navigate the journey from discovery to recovery. Aarti's multidisciplinary approach includes NLP, CBT, DBT, and brain spotting, and knowing all of these different modalities allows her to support individuals and families through various trauma-related challenges. She's also a dedicated educator, guest lecturer, and mother of two, and one who does offer these intensive experiences. So if that's something you've heard about, you've wondered if that might be a good fit for you, I know that you're going to get a whole lot out of this conversation with Aarti today. And besides that, Aarti's just one of my favorite people to talk to. She's a great conversation partner. She loves the APSATS organization. And so getting to hear her heart will be a real bonus in this. If you're unfamiliar with APSATS, let me just take a moment to tell you about the Association of Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists. We are a nonprofit organization that seeks to educate and advocate for betrayed partners of sex addicts, those who've experienced chronic betrayal. And let me let you know about a few of the things that we have coming up. On November the 1st, Kat Etherington, another board member of APSATS and one of the trainers for APSATS, is offering a brief training, The Psychology of Victim Blame and Self-Blame in Betrayal Situations. And then not too many days after that, November the 5th through the 8th, APSATS Cornerstone Training, the multidimensional partner trauma model training, will be offered live via Zoom. And this is a really more comprehensive training for anybody, professional coaches, professional counselors, therapists, social workers, who seek to work with this population of betrayed partners. So if that's you, you are in this field professionally and you'd like to work with this population, I cannot highly recommend our multidimensional partner trauma model training. If the November dates don't work for you, don't worry. That's going to roll around again in January of 2025 on the 6th through the 9th. You can go to apsats.org. That's apsats.org and find out more about all of these events and so much more about APSATS. There's a directory of trained professionals who can offer support to you if you're going through the experience of betrayal trauma yourself. You can read about other educational opportunities. We have lots of on-demand educational videos on there and more. So without further ado, we're going to turn our attention now to my conversation with Aarti on this idea of intensive work to work through betrayal trauma. Aarti, welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio. Glad to have you here, my friend.
Thanks, Jake. Wonderful to be here.
Oh, well, I've been looking forward to our conversation, and I always enjoy getting to spend time with you. You bring perspective and ideas that are fresh often to me, and so yeah, I just really value that, and I know we're going to have a great conversation. So I want to jump right in. We're talking about intensive. It's kind of a new thing in the therapy world overall, kind of newer on the scene. Why are intensives important specifically in the recovery process for betrayal trauma?
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about intensives because you're right. It's a new thing, but also something that I find has so much more efficacy done right with the right kind of components, the right kind of things that go into it, because I think it packs in so much. When we're doing recovery work, usually we're seeing people once a week for an hour, and then they go back and they're stuck in their daily life. They come back to us. And sometimes life happens between those sessions, and things that we've talked about or worked through might not hit the point or the mark because other things have come up. And we know, especially when there's betrayal and there's fresh discovery and things are just, snowballing one after the other, people can lose sight of what they discussed in therapy, what made sense to them in therapy. So I find that having intensives such as this, where people can immerse themselves into their recovery work, really jumpstarts their recovery process and protocol. They are not the everyday mundane day-to-day things that can come in the way of them picking up their tools or really understanding the process, getting to know all the things that they need to know and hold it in space. All those things happen slightly easier, and they're able to relate or process through their work at a much quicker pace than they would do if they were doing just an outpatient or what we say once a week kind of therapy.
Yeah, I can totally agree. And I have the luxury now these days of only doing intensives. I remember the frustration back, when I would see people for an hour, which, a lot of times is actually 50 minutes. A lot of people actually do a 50-minute clinical hour, right? And by the time you, get settled, get caught up, fill me in on the last week, that's 10, 15 minutes right there. And then, any good clinician is going to try to land the plane smoothly. So the last 10 minutes, you're not getting in anything new, 10 or 15 minutes. And so that would leave maybe 25 minutes to actually do work.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
And what I don't know about you, but what I have noticed is because we want to land the plane smoothly, we are then wary to pick up something that might not have come up in the initial half an hour of the session, because we don't want to open something that we will not be able to cleanly close before we send them on their way. So sometimes I find that we're kind of chasing our tails when we are trying to do once a week kind of thing. I'm not saying it's completely not working. It does have its benefits.
Absolutely.
So absolutely. I don't think that we're saying that doesn't work at all. No, you need that. It gives structure. It gives credence to your process, and it's definitely necessary. But there are, I think, intensives have their own place. One of my supervisors early on, said this in this way, that it is more like a booster shot in your arm for your recovery. So you do need your daily vitamins and your things that sustain you throughout. But when you are dealing with something especially as intense as betrayal trauma, and you're working with the partner, say you're together in this constant chaos within the system, going for an intensive and working on an intensive really helps actually both sides. I feel partners benefit doing intensive because of their own trauma history, but also we do recommend sometimes for the other side. If we find them very reactive, the person's done the betraying, if there's compulsivity or addiction, we do recommend that they also go in for intensives to break this pattern of dysfunctionality that has come in.
Right.
In fact, I'm reminded of a particular reel of yours, in fact, that I picked up on Instagram recently, where you were answering a question of when people are on that fork, when they go through dysfunction, when they have to decide whether to pick up an old dysfunctional pattern or the right pattern. And you said
Right.
what you need to do is pause, right? And I thought that was amazing because I see an intensive as an elongated pause.
Oh, that's so good.
Them.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I find makes intensive so sometimes so much more effective than weekly therapy. Now, I want to like totally second what you said. Like there is a place for those weekly sessions, that it's needed. It's important.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an either or, I don't think. It's not a right or wrong. But one of the things that I struggled with when I was doing regular ongoing sessions, right, is you have to have incredible discipline to not make that entire therapy hour about what I would refer to as the crisis of the week.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so, and understandably, people who are trying to heal from betrayal, trauma, sex addiction, these things, there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of instability, especially at first. And it makes sense that you're coming in and there's something that just feels so urgent that needs to be dealt with, that you want to talk about, and it feels really important, and it is important. But if you're constantly dealing with the crisis of the week, you don't get to the underlying things that will provide the deeper, more meaningful, more lasting healing.
Exactly.
And I've never thought about considering an intensive a big pause, but I love that idea because we're coming in and we don't feel the pressure of, okay, we've got 1 hour, right? And also intensives, typically there's a much more defined focus on the front end. So it's like, I'm coming in to deal with this deeper root issue.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And now we've got space to do it. Lots of space. There's not the pressure of the clock on us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you talk about the deeper space, because when we see clients week after week, once a week, it is important to have a place to deal with those everyday crises.
Yes.
Because they are not able to deal with them. When the analogy I like to give is when the flames are lapping at you, you can't go down and do an arson investigation. So you do have to put down the fires first. So yes, the weekly sessions do get important to do so. But then you're so right. The underlying cause always takes a back seat. And we are kind of just treating the symptoms. We don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to go under and really work on what's been causing the symptoms. And I guess, when you talk about intensives, you talked about the structure and the space. I also talk about how much a good, well-structured intensive can have packed into it. Like, you do so many different things. You work on self-care. You work on, all the various things of trauma, betrayal trauma. And you really have a support system that gets built when you're doing an intensive in a group. So you have the support of the community that comes in, and you're doing that like not once in a week or once in 2 weeks. It's every day. You're with those same people for a period of time. And the level of transformation, that's the word that comes to my mind, that I see happen for people in intensives is so many folds better than what I would see when I'm seeing people week after week.
Yes.
And I think it's so needed. It's a resource that is needed. That's few and far between. So whenever I see good intensives, I'm recommending them to people. I'm like, please, be it the person who's done the betraying, or be the person who's recovering from betrayal. If you have a good resource, and we all need to be able to send them to these places, it is so important that we bring the shift of thought into intensives more and more, because it's so the only thing that keeps coming back to is it's so needed.
Yeah. In our preparation for this conversation, as we communicated back and forth, you brought up these twin concepts of familiarity versus functionality,
right?
And you were sharing with me just how that relates to the role of an intensive. Can you unpack that for our listeners a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we all talk about familiar dysfunctional patterns that come up when we are looking at in the context of betrayal trauma, we'll say that the relationship has had a dysfunctional pattern long before discovery has happened. Because it's not just that suddenly discovery has happened and patterns gotten dysfunctional. Things might have escalated because of the discovery and things becoming, kaboom, and everything being everywhere. But the dysfunctionality of their relational integrity, what I like to call, has been going on for a while. And that's become a very familiar space. An example that I kind of like to give people is like the person who's done the betraying might have checked out of the relationship long before actual discovery has happened. So be it, getting involved in the household or with the kids or whatever, slowly yet steadily. And I've heard so many partners say that I never signed up for that. We discussed that when we would be a couple, we'd be together, but I just kept stepping in as he kept disappearing because it was under the guise of either, working, having to work harder and longer, and partner thinking she's just supporting, and slowly and steadily a familiar chipping away of the concepts of what they thought was their relational integrity begins to happen.
Right.
That's very familiar, but it's dysfunctional.
Right.
And even for the partner, sometimes, because they're in that soup, even after discovery, they're not able to let go of that space of where they need to keep coming in and being part of the household and taking care of things and, kids and everything that's involved with that. And even if the other side wants to step in, the betraying partner now wants to step in, they don't know how. So they're still stuck in that dysfunctional yet familiar pattern. So I try to explain that concept and say, now what we have is a familiar concept, which is dysfunctional. So what we need to do is work on something that's unfamiliar, but might then be functional. So it's going to feel really awkward. And again, the example I like to give is, I don't know about you, but I learned to drive stick as I was learning to drive.
Yes, me too.
Kids these days, they don't understand what I'm saying, but I learned to drive stick. And if you remember how uncomfortable or completely unfamiliar it was to try to get the car off and get the gas and the clutch at the same time so that it doesn't jump and play camel with us and let us go. And we were so stressed and we never thought we'd get familiar with that. But we did. Before we knew, we could do that, sing a song, yell at the kids, watch the road, do a million different things and not even realize that now this thing which was once unfamiliar has become familiar. And now what is familiar is also functional. But it takes that many tries. Because a lot of times when we are telling them to do something functional, like, for example, in your folk example, to take a pause, that's unfamiliar, to take a pause. But that is functional. Yes. The more often they take a pause and they're able to realize that they are capable of taking a pause, that will, in time, become familiar and yet functional.
Yes.
So when we talk about intensives, and I talk about it as having an extended pause, it breaks that cycle of familiarity and dysfunctionality which go hand in hand. So when my clients start seeing it that way, there's a sense of, they can take a deep breath and say, oh, so it's just a matter of practice. So we can get there. And sometimes it's about simplifying that, though it's a complex quotient, we can simplify that for a trauma brain. And it does feel like it lands a little bit better. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And as I think about the work I do in intensives, with couples, that is what we're doing. Like I use a lot of the same words, I tell them like, this is going to feel awkward. Yes. All new behavior is awkward, but that's why you're here. And guess what? We're going to do this 4, 5, 6 times. I'm going to help you do this over and over and over here. So it becomes sort of almost like muscle memory. And when you leave, you're going to have a much better shot at continuing this new way of doing things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was last year when I did the intensive and we had a few ladies come in and we were sitting and talking. We just came up as a concept, like, just as an example, we came up with a 5-second rule. Like if someone asks us a question, how are you? Say, for example, nobody's going to say I'm fine instantaneously. That's not going to happen. So we're going to say, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. Like count 5 seconds and check in with your body and then say, I'm fine. Or no, actually, my stomach's not doing great today, or whatever the case might be.
Right.
So we kind of came up with that. We're going to try doing that throughout the intensive. And what was interesting is day 4, we were sitting at dinner or something, and we were just, talking to somebody. And so one of the participants asked one of the participants, so how are you doing? And before she could answer, the third participant said, take 5 seconds. And I guess that was the power of the group, because they started reinforcing that. So when you say,
Yeah.
you sit with them and ask them to practice over and over again, when you have an intensive, either you or if you're doing it in a group, them, they are getting you to work that functional yet awkward in your case, or unfamiliar in my case, space, so that they continually build their practice, muscle memory, whatever you want to call it, till it becomes familiar, till the functional becomes familiar. So that's how I
Yes.
kind of want them to think about it.
Yeah, and let's drill down on this a little bit more about how specifically an intensive and the setting created by an intensive helps individuals identify and address those dysfunctional patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Like I get it's a pause, it's a space, but I mean, we've already touched on this in several ways, but I want to put it together real clearly.
Sure.
Like you mentioned the power of the group there a moment ago. So yeah, how specifically can intensives help in
Yeah.
identifying these dysfunctional patterns?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it feels like I'm talking to the master here, because you do so many intensives yourself. But I just did this intensive last year, which was a 7-day intensive for partners of betrayal trauma. I just did a workshop in Sydney on boundaries, which was 3 days, but it was only 3 days because we were speaking specifically about boundaries. But the one thing that I saw as a thread that, that's also an intensive kind of a setting where you're just kind of drilling down and working on yourself with with a sense of purpose. So to me, what intensives do is they bring the focus onto you. So you are not first and foremost distracted by life as it happens outside of you. And I think that is one of its key, I would say, takeaways, that you can focus on yourself. And when it's a structured intensive and a planned intensive, it's not that you're just going and chilling and relaxing in beautiful settings, which is good by itself, by the way. It has healing components by itself. But when we're talking about intensives such as this, I'm truly talking about focusing on things that, like holistic healing. Like you include things like in the intensive that I'm thinking about, or I have planned and working with, you're doing things like starting the day with morning yoga sessions, which are trauma focused. You do breathing exercises, or you end the day with breathing exercises. We do somatic practices in the middle of it. So we are creating so much more focus on you and the person needing the intensive, and any things from practical tools to self-care to your own understanding of what it means to be in this particular situation of betrayal, and allowing yourself to have so many positive experiences, which when you're sitting outside, you're hearing about them, but you're not really feeling them. You're not really experiencing them. What does self-care mean? And a lot of times people are like, I don't have time for that. I have kids to take care of. I have to do this. I have to do that. So how do you start focusing on yourself? When I say, we're going to talk about, say, gaslighting, there's a whole session on gaslighting. And we talk about, what to look out for, how to work through gaslighting. We talk about triggers. We talk about trauma, and we do a whole thing on grief and loss, and we work through post-traumatic. So it goes through the entire stages. And it's all about giving you, the person attending, a practical play-by-play, actually, if you would, on what can happen and what you can do to work through that. And when you talk about an intensive, you're also learning from other people's stories, because everybody's story is unique. Everybody's story has a different flavor to it. So it's about having that self-experience and enriched experience of the people around you. and getting practical tips on how you dealing with that and how am I dealing with that. And here's a booklet which will allow you to deal with XYZ and work through those, which I think can be truly taken on board, I think best in an intensive setting. Because even if you go through the depths of despair, you don't have to worry about, oh my God, I have to fix myself and go and, take care of the kids, or fix myself and go meet somebody socially, or you don't have to do any of that. You can be
Right.
what you need to be, and you can go where you need to go. Know that you're held because professionals are there taking care of you, and then you will get what you need to from that.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. It is. I was just thinking as you were describing that, the ability to walk a betrayed partner, basically through every phase
Yeah.
of that healing journey, which doesn't mean they're going to get to the end of the intent. Just to be clear, you're not saying, okay, in 7 days you're done with this
Yeah.
process, right? But my experience with those sorts of that specific type of intensive is that regardless of where they are in the process,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, even if they're earlier on in the process and they're not yet fully in the grief phase or fully in that place
Mm-hmm.
of post-traumatic growth, it's still giving them a vision for it, and it's planting seeds for it, and it's giving them a knowledge of what is to come that, man, it's encouraging. It gives hope. It gives direction, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better. I exactly that point. And how often I'm asked, is this for someone in a particular stage? And you nailed it when you said it doesn't matter which stage you are in. It doesn't matter if you're together or you're not. It doesn't matter if you're
Mm,
still making up your mind. It doesn't matter if you just discovered a month ago or you've been down the journey like 3 years, 4 years. It is
right.
about you realigning your needs for your recovery, because
Right.
information is there, but how you're going to use it. So for example, when we do the grief and loss, and we do all three stages: safety, stabilization, grief and loss, and it's like it takes them through. Maybe
Yeah.
you've not done grief and loss. Maybe we had somebody who had not yet done even an impact letter, and they were there,
Right.
but they got so much out of it because they could relate, because the pain is there, because the wounding is there. And
Yes.
we need to help them see that there is more to what they're feeling right now. There's something that can help them go through that hope. There's something that will help them see and get to a place that is less painful. And they do
Right.
get a lot out of it. And even
Mhm.
partners who've been, so they run the gamut, right? I had partners who in this early stage and partners who've been there down the road, sorry, for about 3 years or 4 years, and they still got a lot out of it as well.
Yes.
So one of my partners actually said, I'm going to define my life pre-retreat and post-retreat from now on.
Oh,
So
that's so great. Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
it became a running joke, like like before retreat and after retreat, it
Yes.
became a
Yes.
thing
Yes.
in the communications, and they were in a group together. They would talk, and they're still in touch. Almost a year in, the group is so strong, but it's more that they're still talking about it, and
Mm,
the effects are still felt on so
yes.
many different levels. So I think
Right.
intensives really need to be brought more into recovery mainstream resources.
Right. Right. For sure. Yeah. I just to validate, give further evidence for what you're saying. Actually, right now, as we're recording this
Mhm.
episode, we've got 6 ladies out at our conference center, the Magnolia
Nice.
House,
Yeah.
for our Returning to You program for
Hmm.
partners. It's 7 days, and one of the questions that we often get is around, like, is everyone going to be in the same place as me in
No.
this journey? And we say no. And in fact, I went out there and I had breakfast with all the ladies on Wednesday, which was wonderful and one of my favorite things that I get to do.
Hmm.
And there was such diversity in terms of their stories and where they are in this journey. And
Yeah.
there was a woman who discovered just weeks ago, like less than 2 months ago, had her
Wow.
discovery of betrayal. And I can say this without disclosing, protected
Yeah.
health information,
Yeah.
and is just a matter of a few months away from delivering a child, right?
Wow.
So that's, like that's where she is.
Yeah.
And then other women there who they've been at this for 3.5, 4, 5 years, 6
Mm-hmm.
years,
Mm-hmm.
feeling stalled out, this, that, the other. And because I keep tabs on what's going on during these things, the report I got last night was they're all sitting around the fire, this little fire pit in the evening, encouraging one another, continuing the sharing of their stories, continuing that shared wisdom that comes from the group. Where
Beautiful.
there's something about, yes, if you're early on, seeing what's possible from those who are ahead of you in the journey, who've
Mm-hmm.
walked ahead of you. But also, if you're the person further behind, looking back, remembering where you were, what you've come from, and then also that felt sense of being used to share wisdom, to almost in a way, like it's in a way sort of redeeming some of your pain, because you're turning around and you're such a blessing and a gift to this other
You're
person,
giving back. You're giving back.
which is healing, which is
Totally.
so healing and
Totally.
empowering for a
100%.
betrayed partner. Yeah.
100%. I mean, because there's this constant, like as human beings, we're constantly searching for meaning, especially when something goes
Yes.
wrong.
Yes.
We need to make sense of it. It cannot be all a waste. I
Right.
think that part of it is deeply ingrained and hardwired in us as
Yes.
human beings. And when something like this happens, there's the constant search of, I need to make sense of this. Why did this happen? This part of looking back, and yes, seeing how far you've come, but also being able to say, I'm now a positive force for someone else in this journey, is I consider as one of those moments where they truly begin to take their recovery another notch up. So
100%, because that is one of the evidence-based markers for post-traumatic growth.
correct,
And
exactly.
that felt experience of, oh wow, I just did something that felt so rewarding and good to me. I
Mhm.
see it help someone else, and I know I never could have done it
If I hadn't,
without, if I hadn't walked this journey.
yeah.
Oh, wow. Like that can begin
Mhm.
to reframe the experience in such a profound way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I see that even in the support groups that I run, which is one of the longest running support groups in this part of the world. So sitting in this part of the world, I'm constantly like, okay, what are the resources that are happening there that people might not be able to access just because geographically we are so far away. But when I see in my support groups, people who've been down the journey 4, 5, 6 years, they keep coming back more so to talk to the people who've just started their
Yes.
journey. And
Yeah.
they're so generous, because they will tell me, Aarti, you give my number to somebody who's just started the journey. They can just contact me one-on-one. I'm happy to spend my time because it helps me. So what you're
Yes.
saying is so profound that in the beginning, obviously, we cannot see it. It's impossible, in fact, to even see that. But when you see these, I'd like to say, powerhouses of strength come together
Mhm.
and transform each other's lives, it leaves me awestruck a lot of the times when I'm sitting and like, wow, you could do that after all this, or after all that you've been through. Phenomenal.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit about, who would actually benefit from an intensive, and even, I think it's important to say when might we not recommend an intensive for
Mm.
someone, even. So let's start with who would benefit. Who's an intensive for ideally?
So the intensive that I would look at for partner betrayal trauma would be for anybody who's, it's not necessarily for people who have only compulsivity or sex addiction and in their partners. So it's not only for partners of sex addicts or compulsive behaviors. It's for anybody who's experienced betrayal, infidelity in their relationship, struggling to make sense of what are their hopes, what are their chances, anything that takes them away from what we all like to call the trauma fall. They're struggling with that. They're spinning. They don't know which way is up, which way is down. So it is anybody who's struggling with that. Anybody who is farther along in the journey, but finds themselves stalled or stuck and saying, this particular aspect. So I have partners like, I don't know, I'm not able to break through this particular aspect because no matter what we do, we seem to be hitting a surface level thing, but maybe not going a little deeper. And that usually happens when we're doing grief or loss or something, because in an intensive, we can take that nicely a one notch down. And, it's really something that I find in the intensives can break that glass ceiling for anybody. So primarily, I would look at these two class of people struggling with betrayal trauma, either not knowing where they are or how to even go down or begin this journey sometimes, and for people who have been on the journey but feel like they need to get something more. They're kind of stuck and they need to kind of push through a particular aspect. Either they might know it, they might not know it, but they might just feel, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm just like, my husband might be doing great recovery, but I'm feeling like I'm still stuck. And that's a narrative that keeps coming up sometimes, that he's now seeming to be doing better, but why am I stuck? Why am I not able to break this monotony in my head? And what do I need to do for myself? So it's that, again, that booster shot thing that'll help you move through where you feel you're stuck. So that would be where I would be looking at it as.
Yeah. That's super helpful. And is there anyone that you would say not yet? And I'll go first, because I know this isn't necessarily a fun conversation to talk about. Okay, who would we not necessarily bring in? But we say like someone who maybe is struggling with suicidal ideation.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Someone who is really, really struggling, highly sensitive to other people and group dynamics right now. They don't have good sort of emotional boundaries, and they could, we want to keep individuals and the group safe and stable. And so any of those factors that would threaten that experience, make it unsafe for any one of the individuals or others, I'm not saying never or no, but maybe not yet. Maybe not until some initial individual stabilization work is done first. Anything you would add to that, or in addition to that?
Pretty much the same. I might just expand on the suicidal ideation piece, because it's not. I would want to understand, because I'm not saying all partners, but a lot of partners have that feeling of they want this to end. They're not thinking about ending themselves.
Right.
Want this to end, and that feels sometimes like, we have to sit down and, as clinicians, sit through, is this an ideation, or is this a desperate need for the pain to stop, or and figure it out. So I would spend some time talking to them and asking them, and really sussing out whether this is active suicidal ideation, or is it, just the trauma coming up and saying, I just want to numb and freeze this space out of me. So that's also something that I would, segregate and look at it in a little bit more, how do I say it, careful manner on who is going to come through. I am definitely more inclined to think about people who are sensitive to groups. That would be more of my, that's something that might be difficult, because we are going to be in a group. We are going to do a lot of group activity. But having said that, sometimes if people are wanting to come through groups but have their sensitivities, they could also tell us as the facilitators that, these are their goes, these are their no-goes. And sometimes I find that also helps to help them also grow and not feel like they're stuck in this particular moment of their sensitivities. But yes, these would definitely be a space. Another place that I haven't personally experienced, but I've heard from other therapists, if there's active abuse happening, I would want them to come to this thing, at least to give some distance. But there might be some other hurdles like financial and other things that they might not be able to come, because abuse comes in many forms. And I might have to look at them and talk to them and see how other ways we can provide assistance. But it's not that they can't come, but these are the people who might find some blocks to come into these intensives. But broadly speaking, I think you covered it.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Good. Well, you have an exciting intensive coming up for betrayed partners that's happening in India.
Yes.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? Share what you're doing there, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I was looking for intensives for partners and trying to figure out how to do something and realized, well, we don't have anything in this part of the world. We have your lovely little place all the way there in Texas, which is wonderful. But what to do when people are in this part of the world? So last year
Yeah.
I said, okay, we're going to try and create something here. And we did. It's called Wings of Hope. And we take a minimum of 3, maximum of 7 partners, and we go into the lovely little mountains of Nilgiris in the south of India. It's a gorgeous little, very, very compact. It's a resort, but very small footprint of a resort. And since now they know what kind of work we do, they give us a lot of special treatment, let me put it this way. So we give in our own space. Nobody bothers us for the 7 days that we are there. And it's just one of the most, the place itself is so healing. So let's start with that. And that's so important, right, Jake? Because we need them to come
Yes.
to a place where they can feel cared for, where they can feel like they can
Yes.
leave everything behind and they feel pampered, and they can take care of, they know that they can take care of themselves because somebody else is taking care of them. Their other needs like
Right.
cooking, cleaning, everything is sorted out for them.
Mm.
And when we go there, we spend 7 nights, 8 days, if you would, working on various facets of recovery. Self-care, like I said in the beginning, becomes a very, very important facet. So we start every day with a morning yoga exercise session. We end every day with breath work. So it's your sessions are book-ended between these two spaces throughout. And throughout the 7 nights, 7 days, sorry, we work through a lot of practical tools to understand the 3 stages of trauma recovery: triggers, gaslighting, DARVO, boundaries, attachment styles, somatic work, grief and loss, and post-traumatic growth. So we go through a lot of these things with experiential exercises, theoretical psychoeducation, and linking all these things to their individual stories. So time is given for each of us. There's, like, of course, there's presentations happening, but there's a whole workbook that's developed for them in the program. So they are actually working the program from their individual story perspective. So it's not just that this is what's happening and hey, we've heard it, now we're done. No, you're going to work on it from your life experience. So that's what probably most of the participants found really transformative for themselves, because though the knowledge was there, it was juxtaposed onto their own story, and they were working from that angle.
Yes.
And then we moved into working through a lot of their what I like to call a little bit of their own story, which they brought in, even if it wasn't about the betrayal trauma. So that also allowed them to do a little bit of a deep dive into their own story without feeling blamed, without feeling shamed, without being told that somehow it's their fault. But it's just giving them an understanding, because whatever we bring, I believe, helps us know what our strengths are and where we are challenged with some things. So it's brought up in a very gentle manner so they can work with their strengths and augment their challenges to help themselves make an empowered statement in their own recovery. So it's not just about me telling them what to do. They're figuring their own strength out as they're doing this. So a gentle into that. And of course, we create these meaningful connections, and everybody's learning with, not just their own stories. They're encouraging each other's stories. If somebody's getting stuck, the group comes together and kind of puts an arm around that person's shoulders, like, we got your back. You can do this. That's phenomenal. We did a small little exercise called Not Your Shame Story, when they were trying to disengage from their internalized trauma of what was happening on that side. So there was a particular moment where one of the partners was really finding it difficult to articulate that, because she had imbibed that so much, and the entire group, without me having to say anything, just stood behind her and put their hand on the back, like, we got your back, just say it, we got it. And I could see her come out. That's such a powerful moment. So those connections, we can't script those things. Those just happen in the moment, and and the beautiful surrounding. We start with that and we end with that.
That is great. And we'll have, of course, in the show notes for this episode, so down below, wherever you're watching or listening to this, we'll have links if you want to find out more about that retreat or anything that Aarti's doing. Aarti, I always like to ask my conversation partners here, but as we wrap up, just to offer some words of hope to our listeners. What would you say to betrayed partners who have sat through this conversation with us, and clearly something must be speaking to them if they've given us the last 40 minutes of their time?
Right.
What would you offer them?
Well, in one sentence, there is hope. And it is not about only if your partner is going to get onto the recovery bandwagon or not. As a betrayed partner, you need to know that your recovery is not incumbent on his recovery. The direction of your recovery might be defined whether he's getting on the recovery bandwagon, whether he's willing to make healthy choices, etc., etc., etc. But your recovery can be just that, your recovery. And having now done this, I'm sure you've done it much longer, but I've been doing this now for 10 plus years in this part of the world. I do believe that most partners I've worked with have been able to come out on the other side and say, I crossed that hill. I came up on the other side of that hill. Time is individualistic for people. Some people get there slower, some people get there faster, but there is hope. I can't emphasize that any lesser or greater. It's just that word. There is hope.
Thank you, Aarti. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Yes. No, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so
really,
much.
yes. And really and truly, just the work you described doing for that intensive, I know how much it takes to create a program like that. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Okay, thank you, Aarti.
See you guys.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Betrayal Recovery Radio, hosted by Dr. Jake Porter. If you value the content we've shared today, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. For more resources, visit APSATS.org. That's APSATS.org.